Hey everyone, Rebirth Fever Part 4. I've only got a little more that I want to cover, or a little more that I'm getting. I pretty much covered most of it. In fact, if you think about it, it's amazing how many of the comic books fit in the slot of the main Justice League members, basically. Batman, Superman, and their families. And then the others, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern. I guess Green Lantern has a bit of a family of comics. And Aquaman and the Flash. And so we're getting all of these twice a week, so that's taking up the bulk of the DC output. They've got more stuff coming out that they're trickling out, and then they're going to have things in Young Animals, which is their new line, which is going to have things like Doom Patrol, and Shade the Changing Woman. So there'll be a little bit of the edgier DC stuff over there. But one of the main guys that I haven't talked about is Green Arrow. I haven't talked about yet. I could almost have put him under the lantern of the Justice League, although he's not in the Justice League right now. But he's probably familiar to a lot of people from like the old Justice League cartoons and such, and has often been a member of the Justice League, along with Black Canary. So part of the interesting thing about Green Arrow is the team-up with Black Canary, at least as played right now. It's a team-up book, and they're an interesting team. They are, a romantic couple, and they clash, and that makes them fun. I did not love the Rebirth issue. It seemed way too on the nose for me, and I thought I would end up dropping Green Arrow, but somewhere after the first real Green Arrow issue came out, and I heard other people raving about it, and at the same time I was starting to get this feeling like I wanted to get every Rebirth comic, every comic in the Rebirth time zone right now. So I picked up Green Arrow 1, and it was pretty good, and I loved the art. And then 2, somewhere in 1 and 2, there were places I think where I found the dialogue a bit cheesy, a bit awkward. There was a certain amount of not unprofessional writing, but writing that wasn't up to like top comic book writing standards. But then it seemed to get better. Perhaps I'm affected by the change in artist to Juan Ferrier. I'd be totally happy with either Juan or Benjamin Schmidt. Is that his name? Can't find the credits here. Let's see. His name is Otto Schmidt. So Otto Schmidt's really good. Juan Ferrier, however you say his name, is amazing. It must be kind of digitally painted that he can produce issues like this, art like this on a ongoing regular basis is seems almost miraculous compared to what we usually get from product from Marvel and DC. And there's a lot of times where I think a digitally painted comic might annoy me and distract me, but it's done so well here that I lap it up. It's gorgeous. And so did that make Percy's writing seem better, or has he got more in the groove as these issues have gone along? There's a wonderfully grotesque set of villains, which I'm assuming will get explored even more. Loved the design of like that ship that I was just showing. This is actually a ship, an ocean-going ship that looks like that. I mean, the whole thing is kind of demented and crazed and over the top, but in a way that was just a ton of fun. There was the almost to be expected reversals of betrayals and betrayals within betrayals, you might say. And I'm interested to see where all that will lead for future issues and future relationships. I can't remember now if Green Arrow at the end of this arc was going to get his money back or not. But I thought it was funny. I was, oh, we can't blow up the ship because my money's on that ship. Which is funny for a number of reasons, because money kind of exists as a digital thing right now. As long as the computer accounts still exist, your money still exists usually. Maybe did they physically I need to go back and read it to answer these questions about whether they physically actually turned all of his assets into something transportable, like gold or something. I don't know. Anyway, that was funny, and so yeah, now I'm on board Green Arrow. I'm not ultra super compelled by his character and everything, but it's a well-oiled machine of a fun superhero story, fitting in with that bubblegum popcorn potato chip theory that I'm having about why I'm enjoying the Rebirth superhero comics so much. Although with this heightened level of art, it feels like something more important than just bubblegum. I think Juan Ferrier should be winning awards, Eisner Awards or whatever awards they give to artists of superhero comics. He's just kind of blowing me away. I'm just loving right now re-looking through all of this. Oh, and then the spoilers, big spoiler on Green Arrow at the end here, and this gives me big pause. He lands on the deserted island and he says, "Not again." And that's a deep part of the Green Arrow mythos. But then recently in the New 52, Jeff Lemire played a lot with that and the whole island thing. So it does feel like if you've been reading a lot of Green Arrow, you're going to be kind of pissed if he's... So it's kind of ironic to have Green Arrow at the end of this issue saying, "Not again. I'm back on the island. We're not going to play this plot line again, are we?" Particularly just when his team was getting back together again with the Green Canary and his half-sister and the guy from the TV show whose name I can't remember because I don't watch the TV show. So this seems to be the last of the things that I've looked at, the last major, really cool, I'm so glad I'm reading it, Rebirth series. Then then we've got one that plays with the idea of being one of the central features of Rebirth, that in the Jeff Johns Rebirth one-shot, Wally West, the old Flash, and before that the old Kid Flash, comes back, and then in Titans Rebirth he rejoins the Titans, and his touch brings back their memory of the missing 5 years that have been taken away from the DC universe, whether by Dr. Manhattan or Ozymandias, or the combination of the two, or there's some other twist coming up in that. So Titans kind of promises to be the comic that follows that thread, follows on with the ideas hinted at or begun in the overall Rebirth one-shot. But I hear that Jeff Johns says, well, it's going to take about 2 years to get to that story. So is Titans going to spend 2 years chasing down blind alleys and getting little hints clues that in the end aren't important clues because all the stuff is being held back for Jeff Johns to come back and do something big, or some other big event plan set in motion by Jeff Johns? Or will we really get some substance in these Titans comics? And maybe we can just enjoy them as popcorn comics, potato chip comics, as they go about their adventures of not finding out the truth or getting little teeny dribs and drabs of the truth that aren't really important until we get to the big event. And maybe that could be, but the big stumbling block for me and for some other people, but not for everybody, is the very 90s style art of Brett Booth and his inker Norm Rapmund, and even his colorist, even the colorist who works with him. I don't know if it's his colorist. I can't find the credits. I think the colorist may be Dollhouse. It says on the cover, the last name on the cover is Dollhouse. So anyway, that colorist chooses to emphasize the 90s look of everybody with the kind of shiny, lots of gradients kind of coloring that along with me not liking the 90s art to a degree, I really did not like the 90s coloring. And this is kind of a souped up, slicker version of that coloring because they weren't as good at digital coloring back then as they are now. So, and we've had like a pretty decent Rebirth issue, although it felt like just a minute went by. And after reading this, I said I wasn't going to pick up the Titans. But again, it's hard for me to stop. And there's enough little tidbits and interesting things that gone on in these two issues to make me sort of okay with continuing to pick them up. This issue was particularly dumb, and mostly stuff that the Titans did was pointless until the last page where it was revealed a return of an old villain, not one I really know anything about, Abracadabra. Kind of a goofy name, but yeah, we're used to goofy things in superhero comics. And then there was this killer cover by this art team that I don't like normally, but I loved this cover with puppets. The Titans don't actually appear as literal puppets inside the comic, unfortunately. But there was something interesting of having these kind of magically created doppelgangers of the Titans of the past have a throwdown with our current Titans. So I kind of enjoyed that. And there's a little something interesting about each character. Dan Abnett is a good writer, so he does know what he's doing with, keeping characters interesting. And it was so made for an interesting battle between the characters of the past and the present, or sort of warped mirror versions of the past. So that was fun, and I almost was getting into the art to a degree. And there was interesting hints that somehow this Abracadabra guy does have memories of the past that no one else has. So that's very interesting. So I don't know. I'm kind of hanging by a thread on this one. It seems like in Rebirth at the moment, with me buying so many, there's 3 or 4 that are right on the edge. They could fall off the edge at any moment. I could drop them quite easily. Then others that are question marks, like, is this heading... I can see this becoming really good, so I kind of want to stick around and see if it fulfills the promise. And then there are other ones that just seem so solid and so good, like, say, Superman, that I have no thought about dropping them at the moment. They'd have to take radically different turns to become droppable. Or like Detective Comics, or like Nightwing. Those are the really solid ones. The Green Arrow is close to that zone, I guess. Titans is way on the edge. Also way on the edge for me is the Blue Beetle. And it might be partially because I don't have any Blue Beetle history. I know of the Blue Beetle. I know the Blue Beetle from the Brave and Bold cartoon, which I like a lot, because they devote like 4 or more episodes to the Blue Beetle in the Brave and Bold. But I struggled with like long conversations with his friends, who I guess we're supposed to already know and kind of enjoy the recapitulation of their relationships in the first 4 pages of the comic book before we get to any kind of action. And I just didn't... All these clever quips and stuff did not seem like clever quips to me, and I didn't get into them. So I was thrown out of the comic from the beginning. The art is okay, but he was fighting supervillains that just seemed minor, and this was very much in a minor key, and it wasn't in a big rush to impress me or make me, that the tricks that writers do to make you want to keep reading, which I think are particularly important in first issues to make you want to pick up the second issue. Because I'm kind of in the habit of getting all the rebirths and I've got them all on my pull list, I probably will read another Blue Beetle or two. But it feels right now like the next issue has to be really, really suck me in, or Blue Beetle is one of the first ones teetering on the edge of being pulled. So, in a way, Titans and Green Arrow and Blue Beetle are a little bit, those are maybe, everyone else is an A character and those are B characters maybe, in a way. I mean, at one point Titans were, the New Teen Titans by Perez and Wolfman ages ago were like the core of why people loved DC. And Green Arrow on and off has had an interesting career, but usually as a minor player. But he's got his TV show now, and I don't know. But it does seem like, the whole strategy of DC was to focus on their core. And I guess I never thought of Blue Beetle as core. And the way Titans are being treated, it feels like they're not at the core, but oddly feels like they're a very minor book, and yet oddly are given this plot thread from the core book. So I guess I'm wrong in saying that they're not a core book. So then there's just, to my reading, well, I'm not reading Harley Quinn, which is a very popular book and is just basically continuing as it always has. So you could say that's kind of an edge case book because it's not really part of the core of what DC does. And then there's these two other books, Deathstroke and Hellblazer, that both strike me as the biggest outliers from what DC Rebirth seems to be about. And I could easily see these as Vertigo books or New Animal books with just a few tweaks. I liked both of them quite a bit, but I'm worried for their future, you might say. Hellblazer was fun, and I'm curious to see what's happening next. There's stuff set up in kind of a Vertigo, almost Sandman kind of way, with some characters who clearly are immortal or semi-immortal, who are apparently hiding from the creator, and we have them at kind of the beginning and the end of issue number 1. I don't think they're mentioned in the Rebirth issue. And then in the middle we have all this fun stuff with Constantine and Swamp Thing. And I have to confess, I was not a Vertigo Hellblazer reader. I might have read an issue or two, but there's all these old stodgy guys who say, Hellblazer in the DCU is bad, and I want my old Vertigo Hellblazer. Well, I wanted my Alan Moore Swamp Thing Hellblazer, and I didn't want to continue with Hellblazer outside of that little universe. So that's why I never followed the old Hellblazer. So I'm finally over that, and I feel ready to follow Hellblazer now. And so without a knowledge of how great those other stories were, I thought this was a good, solid story. I liked the artwork, but I hated the coloring. I just found it full of brown and murky, just murkiness, as if brown was mixed in with whatever other color palettes there were. And often, and this stuff sometimes will look better digitally than it actually looks on the page, so it may glow off your computer screen or your phone screen here better than it does off my page. But just these kind of roughly brown stuff in the foreground, and then in the middle ground, and then in the background, all kinds of shades of the same thing, just looks like a wash to my eye. So that's been my biggest complaint about Hellblazer. And I think Moritat, the artist, is involved with his coloring. So colorings are listed as Andre's unpronounceable name and Moritat. So he is involved to some degree in the coloring, but I think they're just looking at things on a computer screen and really making a big mistake not thinking about how it prints out. Does the writer here know what he's doing? Ben Oliver, I think is his name. I feel like Simon Oliver. I feel like I've read something else by him, but I can't remember what. So far, I'm really ready to go with this and having fun. It leans towards the Vertigo for me and feels funny in the Rebirth, which just, the only bad thing about that is it just makes me nervous that it will be canceled very soon, or when the numbers go down, they'll do some bizarro crossovers that will ruin the vibe of the story or something like that. So it's a bit surprising to me with their basic decision to make, the Rebirth lineup as mainstream as possible. Why did they pick Hellblazer? Because he had a TV show recently or something? I don't know. He just doesn't seem to fit in. If they want to do a metaphysical superhero, why not do the Spectre or someone else who just wears tights and is a little more close to that kind of thing? Deadman, maybe. But it's surprising that Hellblazer is not like pushed back till later or coming out from Young Animals or whatever. Deathstroke, on the face of it, could be like the Punisher and Deadpool and those kinds of Marvel violent characters that, a lot of readers enjoy just for thrills. And it could be kind of a bubblegum book that goes along with the main theory of Rebirth, but it's not. The way it's done is very different. It's very psychological and very political and very what's the word I want? It's focused on Deathstroke's strategies. So it almost, to me, could be some kind of Vertigo book. And it's written by Christopher Priest, who has had quite an interesting and varied career in comics, going back to the 80s. I think he was a writer on Conan for a while under the name of Jim Owsley, and did a lot of the regular Marvel comics back then, and then changed his name to Christopher Priest and is known for things like his run on the Black Panther and for his humorous series from Valiant in the 90s. What was that called? Quantum and Woody. And I'm not sure. I think he comes in and out of comics too, and he's often complains about being typecast in writing black characters. And I heard an interview with him or with someone talking about him saying that Dan DiDio came to him and asked him if he'd like to write Cyborg, and he said something along the lines of, Dan, I'd love to write for you, but not a black character. And they gave him Deathstroke. And he's doing really interesting things with it. I have to confess that I don't 100% follow all the twists and turns, the sort of almost like intellectual spy novel machinations going on. I hope to understand them more as things go along. I was a little confused as to who this character was with the similar hair and beard to Deathstroke, but he has an eye. I'm sure if I went back, and they do explain who he is to some extent, but there's just some aspects that are a little confusing. I don't know if he's this guy in the flashback. But I think that Christopher Priest has added a new family for Deathstroke other than the children he used to have in DC continuity, and made that a much more psychologically complex situation. So yeah, I'm really super curious as to what Christopher Priest will be doing with this, and also worried that, if, like in the New 52, early on there'll be a few things that will be culled very quickly, that Deathstroke and Hellblazer will be culled very quickly. And I will particularly miss Deathstroke. I will miss Hellblazer pretty much too. But I'll continue to keep them on my pull list. Maybe my support, my contribution will keep them going. So it'll be interesting to see how a lot of these books play out. It's part of the fun of starting with them at a beginning. And this is more of a beginning than most of the Marvel Now and Marvel Now beginnings, but not as much of a new beginning, I suppose, as the New 52. But it seems like so far it doesn't seem like as mucked up a beginning as the New 52, where New 52 had the timeline so confused. Ironically, their reboot now is to say the timeline was confused by some outside force, and that somehow has freed up all these writers to maybe deal with their new beginning better. So yeah, there's still the looming clouds of crossover events the clouds we see off in the horizon, and if somehow God and Dan DiDio are willing, and Jim Lee and all of the rest of them, Bob Harris, the events will touch things lightly, and we will really get to see where these creators go with these characters. Kind of starting at in the most optimistic view for me, starting at the light, optimistic, let's have fun with superheroes level is a great place to start, because that recapitulates the evolution of superheroes, where we started in the fun, light Silver Age, basically, or the fun, not so light Golden Age. But I feel like the Silver Age is more of the start of things for what we read now. And then we piled on layers, and the characters grew and such. And so that's super optimistic of me to imagine interesting evolution of these comics in a few years after Rebirth. But we'll see. And I will find other good comics when Rebirth gets bad, or the DC Comics gets bad. I think I may... I'm pretty sure I'll be getting the Titans and the new Supergirl comic. Well, I already have started the new Supergirl comic because I got the Rebirth one. I think I'll get the new Teen Titans one, more driven by my daughter's desire to see that. When I saw samples of the art, I was kind of turned off. But maybe I'll get into it. But I'm at the moment telling myself I'm not going to get Cyborg. And so as they roll out even more, I think I'm saturated with Rebirth comics at the moment. But yeah, we'll see what my self-control is and what I hear other people saying about things. It's easy enough if I hear that, as I did with a number of these, like Green Arrow, that it's really great. I go and I grab the first 3 issues, and I'm back on board. So talk to y'all later, and hope you're enjoying reading your comics as much as I am.